slowly I'm intending to put videos with terminology about different topics that could happen that you would need during your interpretation profession. Okay, the first most important thing we have to know what is the difference between interpreter and translator. All right, let's start with interpreter. Interpreter is a person that facilitates communication between two parties that speak different languages orally, which means speaking from one language to another. Speaking only. Interpreter cannot write a note. Interpreter cannot write anything. It's not okay. Translator is a person who is trained and convey a message from one written document to another. It could be a paper, letter, messages, but it's all written. So translators write, interpreter speaks. So if you wanna be serious taken as an interpreter or translator, make sure you know the difference. And if they ask you for your interpreter rate, you could say, my interpretation services cost that much per hour or that much per minute. If you're working as a translator, you can ask to be paid by cartel, by sign, by alphabet, by word, whatever. It's very, very different, okay? Let's start with different interpretation services. Now I'm gonna add the basis of different interpretation services in this video because a lot of people doesn't know what is the difference, but there are tons. And the second video is going to be about interpretation modes, what interpretation modes are and when they are used. Okay, business interpretation. Business to business interpretation requires interpreters that speak different languages, that interpret between groups of people or just two people, could be buyer and seller in certain fields, right? Here in the business interpretation, the way to interpret normally is simultaneously, which is mean together with the speaker. Business interpreters often have a little bit different role than only interpreter. They're also intermediator between the two parties, because when you when you walk with a buyer that is going to a business meeting to different stand in a trade fair, the buyer already repeat for you one time where they're from, what they're looking for in this trade fair, what's their goals and so on, and ambition, what company they present and what they're looking for in a business communications and so on. So when you arrive to the meeting, you present the buyer or the person that you interpret for, and you present yourself as an interpreter, and then you give the title, the name, what kind of goals this company is looking for, what kind of company they are, and what they exactly need. You intermediate between both, trying to make sure that the person that is on the stand can present the useful information to this buyer, because a lot of companies do a lot of things, and it's very important that you focus on what the buyer needs, so the person on the stand can offer the related services or related presentation and so on, related communications. Conference interpreting is the same interpreting in business field, but you have a special booth, a special table, a special area in the trade fair where the interpreters stand, and they interpret normally only from one language versus another. You have only one target language. In business interpreting, you interpret vice versa both languages. In conference interpretation, you interpret versus one language using a headset phone and microphone, and your listeners, if it's like a large audience, they listen your interpretation in headset phones, right? If it's one special, very huge business meeting, normally you have one or two or three businessmen that are gonna listening you're interpreting. But again, you're gonna only interpret from one language, let's say English, Spanish, English, Italian, one target language. You're not gonna interpret vice versa, just one language and everybody wanna work in this field. Why? No, it's amazing. I would love myself to work as a conference interpreter. I have never worked as a conference interpreter. I work as a business to business meetings interpreter and so on, but never like only one language. I think that would be an amazing opportunity. So if you need a conference interpreter with Bulgarian, Italian, Russian, and Macedonian, please give me a call. All right. And in the business and conference interpretation, normally the interpretation mode is simultaneous, which means together with the speaker. If we're talking about something very, very specific, you can drop down the mode. The businessmen wait for the interpreter to be precise, especially if it's something very technical, like, for example, I used to interpret in Ecomondo, Italy for ecology fair. And it was very precise, and they did give me a time, and they did make sure that we asked the precise questions. It could be very technical as well. And my goal and my dream is to go back to business interpretation here in America. I think if you guys need an interpreter, give me a call. Medical interpretation. The medical interpreters are interpreters that work as interpreters in medical field, which means they work with doctors, nurses, medical staff, medical specialists, dentists, any kind of doctors imaginary on the world, and terminology related to that. That's what the medical interpreter do. Interpret between the doctor and the patient, the dentist and the patient. So you need a special training. I'm certified medical interpreter, working here in America 4 years, providing freelance services for different fields. If you're a clinic or private clinic that need a medical interpreter, you can give me a call. Court interpretation services are interpreters that work in a court system. Their terminology is related to lawyers, witness defendants, cases, and so on. I only provided so far interpretation services, legal interpretation services for court systems through the phone, and that's it. Again, the interpretation is consecutive. In medical as well as consecutive, because you have to be very precise. Court interpretation, they said the best mode to use is simultaneous, and yes, I agree, from English to another language as well to use simultaneous. But when the witnesses give their statement and it's really serious matter, it's best to use consecutive, especially if we're talking about crime cases or something extremely serious. It's important to be precise. Over the phone interpretation, consecutive, again, depend on what field you interpret for. If I interpret for, let's say, medical and legal and so on, yes, I do use consecutive or simultaneous, depend on the request, depend on the client. If I work for like financial fraud, it's all depend on the provider. If the provider want it faster, I can do it faster. If this is some kind of a recipe for medicine and how many times you have to take it, of course you use consecutive. But with the experience, you're trained, and it's easy for you to switch the mode and start whichever a little bit faster or slow down when it's precise. And you as an interpreter have to make sure that you interpret precisely, so you're the one that can guide that and request the doctor to slow down for you to take the perfect notes in order to render transparent and exact message, right? And over the phone interpretation is a little bit more challenging, because you can work for all this field, medical, legal, financial, fraud, or whatever, as well as tourist information and hotel interpreting and reservations and so on. The tone of your voice is the most important tool that you can use in over the phone interpretation. The modes could be simultaneous, consecutive, depends where to interpret and whom. And another a small field that I'm gonna add here, it's music interpretation and naturalization or citizenship interviews. Uh, the interpretation mode, they said, should be simultaneous, but normally sometimes it's consecutive. Again, depend on the case. Music interpretation is very close to court interpretation because you swear yourself again and so on and so on, that you can interpret only to the best of your knowledge. During the interviews, I provide music interpretation services everywhere in America. I am available to travel. Again, Bulgarian, Italian, Russian, Macedonian, and English. My company do have interpreters in LA, San Francisco, San Diego, different places. So with different languages, Spanish, Russian, and so on. If you need an interpreter, please feel free to contact me. That was everything for now. Talking about basics of interpretation and different interpretation services that you can request or want to know about. Thank you for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day. Please press like, press subscribe, write a comment, make suggestion. Thank you. Bye-bye.